Hi there. Continuing our books on military history, I'm delighted to review the book by Ben McIntyre, SAS Rogue Heroes. Now, I've reviewed Ben's work previously, and he specialises in espionage and military history, and he is a very, very good, popular explainer of military history, and he really does do his research, and he makes his books very, very readable. He also tends to present some of this material on TV, and that's equally great to watch. The book was put together based in a large part on the archives and the SAS War Diary, which had been kept since World War II, and it's been backed by the SAS Regimental Association, and there's a foreword written by John Slim, Viscount Slim, who was a troop, a squadron, and the commanding officer of 22 SAS. He was, by all accounts, one of the best officers the regiment ever produced. So the book traces the origins of the SAS to the desert, Libyan desert, and it's a well-worn story. It's been told before, notably by David Stirling himself in The Phantom Major, but there is some doubt about some of the main things that supposedly went into creating the SAS. He got injured parachuting. He came up with a plan for a special force, and then he broke into military headquarters to present these things to the general. Well, the book is notable at this phase by lack of mentioning of Bill Stirling, his elder brother. Now, Bill Stirling really was on top of everything as regards military and special forces. He had founded the STC, the Special Training Centre at Loch Ailot, and what was really a dynamo of ideas. And there's a lot of truth to the rumour that it was actually Bill who came up with the concept rather than David, because David had joined the Scots Guards like his brother, and was by no means a good officer. His nickname was the Giant Sloth. He was known to be lazy on exercises, and spent most of his time in the clubs and casinos in London. But then he joined the Commandos, joined 8 Commando. Now, a lot of guys who are not really suited for regimental soldiering flourished in special forces. This wasn't the case with David Stirling. He was equally lazy in the Commandos and was by no means a star. And he did get injured parachuting and so on, but there's a lot of speculation that it was actually Jock Lewis who came up with a lot of the framework, and it was kind of David Stirling who elbowed his way into Jock Lewis's plans rather than came up with them himself. Now, the SAS was formed as L detachment of the Special Air Service, which was a Special Air Service didn't exist. It was purely a diversionary name to have the Germans believe there were parachute troops in the area when there weren't. So they started training for parachute operations, and one of the training jumps went disastrously wrong. The hooks, there was a fault in them, and this had been known in Ringway, which was the English parachute training centre where they were developing the techniques, really the blind teaching the blind. And hadn't made its way over to the desert, and several guys were killed. Anyway, they remedied the error, and to his credit, David Stirling was the first man out the door on the subsequent jump. But then the campaign at the time was the two armies, the British 8th Army and the Africa Corps under Rommel, faced each other along a very narrow coastal strip. And the hinterland of the desert afforded an opportunity. If somebody went into the desert around and came up in the enemy's rear, they could cause havoc with their communications, with the logistics, and more important, with their airfields. And so this was the idea, that they would be dropped into the desert and then raid the enemy's lines of communication. So they planned Operation Squatter, and it was parachute operation, and it went dreadfully wrong, mainly because they jumped in a storm. It was much too windy, beyond limits of parachuting, particularly for guys who hadn't done a lot of it. And many of the guys were killed in a horrible way, being dragged. It's still in the harnesses and basically flayed alive. Others died on impact. Others had broken backs and so on, and quite a few were captured or killed in firefights with the Germans. Massive losses, and the survivors did manage, or a group of them. The extraction plan was for the long-range desert group to RV with them and take them out by vehicle. Now, the long-range desert group was another special force which had already operating in the area, and actually they provided a lot of or they influenced a lot of how the SAS operated subsequently, because they built up a fount of knowledge on mobility operations, how to live in the desert, navigation, tactics, camouflage, and so on. And this was passed on to the SAS. And to this day, a lot of the desert mobility operations that were done during the First Gulf War were classic long-range desert group ops, really. So they then realized, well, if we're using the long-range desert group to extract us, we could use them to insert us. So the idea was they'd go in into the desert around being taken in by the long-range desert group. There are these Chevrolet vehicles and a variety of trucks, and then walk into the target, do the deed, and walk back, RV, and be taken home. And that concept worked to a large degree. Now, other notables had joined the SAS, and the book really makes you admire Paddy Mayne, Blair Mayne. He was an absolute warrior, a very, very accomplished sportsman at international level, rugby and so on, boxed, and was dedicated to fighting. And he single-handedly destroyed more enemy aircraft on the ground in these raids than any RAF pilot ever did. And he got numerous medals for this. He was actually put forward for the Victoria Cross, but it was denied him. Now, the book keeps harping on about rumours about Paddy Mayne's sexuality, but it's never really ever been established, and there's some doubt as to whether he was homosexual. A lot of evidence since the war and so on that he wasn't at all. Conversely, David Stirling was almost certainly homosexual, but that's not mentioned in the book at all. And now, what does it matter? Well, it matters that back then it was illegal and it was seen as a detriment, certainly to promotion, and there were people who had their careers wrecked by being homosexual. Another character was Reg Seekings, who was a born fighter, and he was a notable on these operations. After the war, he ended up in Rhodesia and was the brains behind the Police Anti-Terrorist Unit Part 2, who did a lot of long-range patrolling under his instigation. Now, in this review, it seems like I'm kind of having a go at David Stirling. David Stirling, there's a lot to be proud of, as the founder of the SAS. But on raids, he was a bit of a liability. On one raid, he tripped over a sleeping sentry and who raised the alarm. And he fell down ditches and so on. And he never really had the success that he wanted and was seeking. Whereas Paddy Mayne and Bill Fraser and other notables, Mike Sadler, who came in from the Long Range Desert Group into the SS, they were all scoring notable successes on raids, and David was wont to take himself to the flesh pots of Cairo as often as he could, and he wasn't much for a planner or debriefer either. So the book covers all this. It covers the subsequent campaigns in France. By the way, Bill Stirling does come into the story because he commanded the 2nd SAS Regiment, and he resigned from it on principle because it was planned to use it basically as infantry, and he sacrificed his career for the regiment, and he did save the 2nd SAS Regiment as a result. France, noted for the atrocities committed to SAS, captured SAS soldiers under the Commando Befehl, Hitler's notorious order. A lot of them were tortured and executed. And the latter part of the book also talks about hunting down the war criminals responsible. A dedicated SAS team stayed on, even though the regiment had been disbanded at the end of the war, and in order to identify and bring to justice these SS criminals. And the book does kind of give a thumbnail about how the SAS was resurrected in Malaya, and it spread to regiments in Australia, New Zealand, the Greek Sacred Squadron, and so on. Notable in the absence of this, in this part, is any mention of C Squadron Rhodesia, who had an absolutely notable and really were one of the world's top special forces. Their activities during the Bush War, just Operation Dingo Zulu 1, for example, ranks with any special force operation in history. Just that one up that they did, and I thought it was strange that they were not even mentioned. But the book does give an insight into life in the desert, the obstacles faced, the bravery of the men, many of whom were already commandos. They came from lay force. The hard training, particularly the crazy parachute training, jumping from moving vehicles at 30 miles an hour and all this kind of thing, when actually they didn't really operate as a parachute unit very, very much anyway, for obvious reasons. But terrific. There's going to be a TV series based on it. Tom Hardy's in it. I'll be interested to see what it's like. Enjoyed the book immensely, and I'm looking forward to reading Ben McIntyre's next.